Status update confirmed. Moving to the next position.
A mechanized assault can look like a clean arrow on a map, but on today's Ukraine front, it can turn into a live fire trap in minutes. In this case, Russian tanks and APCs drive on a Ukrainian-held village, and the first thing that changes the fight is not a breakthrough, but a sudden wall of shelling that forces defenders to choose between holding, moving, or disappearing. Then the battlefield gets colder because vehicles spread out to split attention. Infantry presses toward trenches, and the moment a unit starts to pull back, the sky can follow like a hunter that never blinks. When UAVs and FPV drones sit over the danger belt, cover becomes a false promise, and every step can become a signal. So the side that sees first can decide who lives long enough to react. Stay with World War history, because this story is not just about who advanced. It is about how modern war turns seconds into casualties, and why the next hit often comes from above, not ahead. Russia's opening move was built to break Ukraine's reaction time, because the attack did not come as one straight line, but as several armored elements spreading out at once. Tanks and APCs pushed toward a Ukrainian H-held village, and they did not stay in a tight column. They fanned out on different approaches, so defenders had to watch more angles with the same number of eyes in the same limited radios. That kind of spacing also makes it harder to pick a single main effort, because every route can look like the real one until the last seconds. When a unit cannot read the main direction, it often burns ammo early or shifts teams too late. And that is exactly the stress Russia was trying to create. That setup matters because it turns a defense from planned fire lanes into a guessing game under pressure. And a guessing game is where mistakes start to stack. The moment the vehicles reached the village edge, the tempo changed again because shelling rose fast and turned the outskirts into a noise wall. The purpose was not just damage, but disruption. Heavy rounds force heads down, blur sound cues, and cut short the seconds a defender needs to spot a moving silhouette or track a vehicle's new line. Under that kind of blast rhythm, even a well-prepared position can lose its timing because people fire in bursts, pause too long, then fire again without clear confirmation. This is how suppression works in modern ground war, because it steals observation before it steals terrain. And once observation is stolen, infantry can close distance in the gaps, which is when trenches stop being a buffer and become the next fight. Inside that opening, one detail in the footage stands out because an older Russian APC hit multiple mines in quick succession, yet it was not fully destroyed. The vehicle took repeated blasts. It slowed and it finally stopped, but the soldiers inside were still able to get out alive and take cover. That is not a miracle vehicle, and it is not proof that mines do not work. It is a reminder that blast effects depend on many factors, such as where the charge sits, whether it is anti-personnel or anti-tank, how the force vents, and which part of the hull takes the hit. Older Soviet-era armored carriers often have thick steel and a simple internal layout, so they can sometimes keep a crew alive against smaller charges or improvised devices, even when mobility is lost. But anti-tank mines and shaped charges are built for a different job, and when they strike the right point, the result can be catastrophic, no matter the age of the platform. The key point is that survival and combat power are not the same thing, because a vehicle can be knocked out, yet still deliver troops to a planned spot. From a tactical view, that single outcome can keep an assault on schedule, because the infantry dismount is what turns a noisy approach into a real close fight. If the troops step out in the right window, they can enter trenches while defenders are still stunned, and that can decide the first minutes of contact. So, the twist here is not luck, but timing under fire. And that timing is what carries the story into the next phase of the battle. Trench fighting turns a mechanized assault into a close-range chaos test because sound, sight, and timing collapse into one narrow corridor. When Russian infantry entered the trench network, the fight stopped being about long lines and clear fronts. It became a series of short angles, broken walls, and blind corners where a soldier can only see a few meters ahead. Earth walls cut vision, turns block fields of fire, and damaged sections remove the map inside the trench, so even trained teams can lose orientation under stress. In that environment, the side that moves with purpose can force the other side to react on instinct. And instinct is often slower than a planned push. That is why trench combat often feels sudden, because the real decision happens before anyone can fully understand where the pressure is coming from. The noise is a weapon by itself because heavy gunfire and explosions create a false picture of direction. Sound bounces off BMS and collapsed timber, so shots can seem to come from the left when they are actually straight ahead. Small arms, grenades, and automatic fire blend into one constant roar, and the brain starts filling gaps with guesses. If several rifles fire in different spots at once, it becomes hard to separate a main attack from a supporting burst. That confusion is even stronger when an attacker uses a slight shift in angle, because a few steps to the side can make defenders aim into an empty corridor. This is not about fear alone. It is about how trench shapes distort both hearing and judgment. And once judgment slips, a defense can waste precious seconds firing at the wrong place. In the footage, the Ukrainian side is pushed into exactly that unstable moment where the line does not break in one dramatic collapse, but in small pieces. A few soldiers pull back from one segment. Another group loses sight of them, and the connection between positions becomes thin. At that point, the trench is no longer a shared system because it turns into separate pockets that cannot support each other. If one pocket is hit hard, it cannot call for help fast enough, and it cannot always retreat safely through the same route it used before. This is how a unit can become locked inside a stretch of trench, not because the exits are physically blocked, but because every exit is covered by fire. So, the decision to withdraw becomes a survival choice, because staying can mean being pinned until grenades, close shots, or a flank movement finishes the job. The key lesson is that tempo matters more than volume in this kind of fight, because a trench battle is decided by who controls the few seconds that count. A side can fire non-stop and still lose if it fires into the wrong bend or pauses at the wrong time. Meanwhile, a smaller group can win space if it keeps pressure steady, shifts angles, and forces the defender to reset again and again. That is why these fights often look messy on video, yet they follow a hard logic because information is limited and time is brutal. Ukraine's pullback in this scene is not surrender. It is an attempt to keep a remaining core alive for the next line. And once the retreat begins, the battle does not end in the trench because the danger follows out into open ground and into the sky. FPV drones turn a retreat into a pursuit because they can stay overhead, watch patterns, and strike the moment a team loses rhythm. In the pullback phase, routes are easier to read than during an assault because tired troops tend to reuse the same gaps, pause at the same cover, and follow the same quiet lines between craters. A small quadcopter does not need to see a whole unit to be lethal, because one moving figure can reveal where the rest are heading. Even a short stop can become a marker, since dust settles, radios crackle, and the group bunches for a second before moving again. That is why retreat often becomes slower than planned, because speed without concealment just makes the target clearer. And once the sky has the trail, the ground starts to feel like it has no safe exit. The video describes an FPV strike hitting a group during evacuation and causing heavy casualties. but the exact number cannot be confirmed without independent cross-checking. That uncertainty matters because battlefield footage shows real danger, yet it rarely shows the full count, the full context, or what happened outside the camera frame. What can be said with more confidence is the pattern, because losses often spike when people shift from organized movement to sudden running. A retreating group may carry an injured comrade, and that weight changes pace and spacing in ways that an overhead observer can exploit. When a team is forced into open ground, a single stumble or wrong turn can create a tight cluster, and clusters are what FPV pilots look for. So the threat is not only the blast itself, but the way pressure reshapes movement into predictable shapes. That pressure then pushes the fight into a different kind of control problem. Under drone observation, pulling back stops being leaving the line, and it becomes a careful set of micro decisions guided by radio. A commander's voice can act like a lifeline because it helps troops keep intervals, choose turns, and avoid drifting into a watched lane. At the same time, radio dependence also shows how fragile the situation is, because confusion grows fast when signals drop or competing voices overlap. Soldiers end up crawling, angling around cover and timing short dashes, not because it looks heroic, but because standing upright makes the body an easy shape to track. Even firing back becomes risky since muzzle flash, movement, and sound can point an attacker toward the exact position. This is how surveillance changes behavior, because survival starts to depend on being hard to read rather than being hard to hit. And the longer that pattern holds, the more the battlefield begins to dictate its own rules. Several recent reports, including Business Insider's coverage of drone heavy fronts, describe how casualty risk rises during evacuation and rescue because drones watch for the same paths used by medics and vehicles. That is why windows for movement often shrink to night, bad weather, smoke, or moments when the enemy is distracted, because those conditions reduce visibility and delay targeting. The result is a slower, more exhausting withdrawal because teams wait longer, move in shorter bursts, and accept higher fatigue to avoid being seen. Across the wider front, assessments such as those tracked by critical threats have used the idea of a stretched kill zone where drones, sensors, and rapid strikes make almost any movement costly for kilometers. While terrain, foliage, structures, and electronic countermeasures can still obscure visibility, the battlefield has grown more transparent overall. Drones enable quicker links between detection and strikes, raising baseline risks as many forces struggle to keep pace with this accelerated cycle. This dynamic elevates the role of targeted ambushes as a key mechanism to disrupt pursuits without committing to large-scale counteroffensives. Compact ambush operations prove vital in drone-saturated environments, where precise engagements can alleviate pressure on defenders while minimizing exposure of larger formations. When retreats evolve into prolonged pursuits, Ukraine frequently lacks the opportunity for major counterstrikes. Broad maneuvers are highly visible and vulnerable, prompting responses that emphasize stealth and precision over scale. A compact special forces team might conceal itself within a ruined structure, maintaining low profiles until advancing enemies enter a narrow, manageable engagement zone. In analyzed combat recordings, this approach is evident. The unit leverages the building for cover, then a marksman neutralizes the lead element, disorienting the rest before they pinpoint the source. Precision trumps firepower here. One accurate strike can halt momentum, prompting hasty reactions that expose troops further. Panic often drives soldiers into exposed areas, where follow-up fire proves devastating. The clips also illustrate how contemporary infantry engagements intertwine marksmanship with information dominance. After neutralizing threats, the team advances cautiously rather than aggressively. Corpses may conceal booby traps, and rushed movements risk detection by overhead surveillance or concealed overwatch positions. They verify casualties to mitigate deception risks and scour equipment for operational insights. Though radios were absent in this instance, recovered documents like journals and charts proved valuable. Charts might outline intended paths, assembly areas, or anticipated advances. Journals could disclose routines, codes, or command guidance. Such brief clashes thus yield benefits extending beyond casualties, providing intelligence that bolsters defenses at subsequent positions. These operations succeed only through prolonged invisibility, allowing teams to dictate engagement timing. Persistent aerial monitoring limits windows, as even strong concealment draws scrutiny if patterns emerge. Teams therefore prioritize speed, minimal signatures, and rapid withdrawal before links form between sightings and responses. The recording captures a response to a grounded drone in low-power mode, likely pre-positioned as a sentinel, which the team neutralizes to prevent activation, highlighting how unmanned assets function, not just aloft, but as deployed ground sensors. Ultimately, the ambush represents a struggle for observational superiority as much as a firefight. This aligns with broader observations from battlefield reviews, such as those from the Institute for the Study of War, noting increasingly decentralized fighting reliant on compact elements exploiting fleeting advantages in cover, timing, and terrain. With drones rendering massed advances perilous, emphasis shifts to units capable of rapid strikes, intelligence gathering, and evasion prior to counterstrikes or munitions arrival. Small teams do not supplant larger structures but rather delay adversaries, interrupt momentum, and compel caution, risking traps with every advance. Slower enemy pacing alters dynamics once more, paving the way for drone impacts even in intimate engagements. FPV drones now intrude directly into trench and building clearances, compelling divided attention at critical junctures. In the recordings, advancing Russian elements engage at close quarters when an overhead FPV redirects focus instantly. Weapons aimed down corridors pivot skyward, expending ammunition on elusive, agile threats difficult to track. This shift is rational. An FPV reaching terminal range can conclude the fight explosively. The cost is diverted concentration. Moments spent upward are moments lost monitoring flanks or sustaining advance pressure. The intrusion disrupts not solely through destruction, but by fracturing cohesion. Compromised coordination often halts progress, absent explicit halts. Formations compress behind limited cover, simplifying overhead targeting. Such bunching favors FPV operators, enabling single detonations to wound multiple personnel and demoralize survivors into retreat. Here, the blast seriously wounds one soldier, stalling the group despite imperfect accuracy. Broader impacts include disarray, as aiding casualties disrupts order. FPV harassment thus transforms assaults into erratic, incremental grinds. Contemporary conflict also inverts cost-benefit ratios, with inexpensive platforms imposing disproportionate constraints. An FPV is vastly cheaper than armored assets, yet capable of crippling vehicles, sensors, or crews via precise impacts. This asymmetry influences planning, rendering dense groupings vulnerable to aerial penalties for predictability. Reports including from the Hudson Institute note drones penalizing concentration by providing high returns against clustered targets. Precision-first engagement thus increasingly outweighs armored numerical superiority, extending influences far beyond single positions. It ties into expansive reconnaissance strike chains dominating multiple fronts. Detection now swiftly cues fire adjustment, FPV guidance, or alternate munitions, compressing timelines from sighting to effect. This rapidity renders fortifications transient despite entrenchment. Discovery often outweighs fortification strength. Rapid cycles exacerbate maintenance demands and cumulative attrition. Ground realities simplify. Spotted units must relocate, yet relocation risks re-exposure. Conflict becomes exposure management rather than indefinite line holding. Heavy casualties no longer invariably terminate offensives as adaptations sustain momentum. Russia maintains pressure in select zones via personnel rotation, legacy equipment, and tolerated losses. Ukraine counters through unmanned systems, accuracy, and dispersed tactics to inflate costs per gain despite resource constraints. Both dispersed forces favor smaller elements and scale unmanned integration, as aggregations provoke swift retaliation. The core insight transcends single engagements. Endurance hinges on replenishment, adaptation, and post-damage sustainability. This looms over future offensives, with overhead threats often proving decisive. The recording transcends isolated anecdote, revealing an evolved infantry paradigm. Russia employs armor and barrages to compress response windows, advancing into positions while unmanned assets target rear vulnerabilities. Evacuations, resupply, and minor repositioning once deemed secure. Ukraine retains capacity for concealed ambush cells and accurate fire, yet success requires rigorous stealth and swift disengagement, as persistent skies forbid prolonged stasis. Potential trajectories include heightened fragmentation with escalating drone volumes, expanding lethal radii, and elevating per-movement risks. Alternatively, superiority may accrue to innovators in squad-level counter-drone defenses and jamming. If FPV efficacy wanes, traditional armor and manpower could regain prominence. The third trajectory, sustained mutual attrition, with escalating losses offset by replenishment and adaptation determining prolonged pressure endurance. The pivotal, unresolved issue: which side first masters the detection-to-strike cadence in forthcoming stages? For ongoing in-depth coverage of actual engagements and evolving systems, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to channels focused on military history and analysis.